thank you for joining us on our 7th annual Carl Sagan Day. We are happy to have you here. Whether you are here for your own free will or for the extra credit, my job here is to both inform and entertain you. We have a wide variety of programming here today where we will have both composers, conjurers, and NASA technicians. But for me, I'll be your MC. My name is Alan Leipzig. I teach kids how to blow stuff up, and yet they pay me for it. And I don't get that. But today, I'm here to talk to you about Carl Sagan. This is a quote of his, to undiscovered lands and new worlds. And I think that this kind of summarizes the idea that I'm going to have for my presentation. Because the thing is, you're here at Carl Sagan Day, and someone, well, was trying to find, I think she was trying to find someone selling hot dogs. But still, she stopped me and she asked me, who is Carl Sagan, and why does he have a day? And I thought that my talk might be good if we covered why you are here and why he has a day here, why we're celebrating a holiday for a scientist television personality. So this is the image of Carl Sagan that people who are familiar with him are generally familiar with him today. The person who appears online, the one who's associated as kind of a mentor to Neil deGrasse Tyson, someone who you can generally hear auto-tune going over and over again. But you don't really get the effect. The question is, what did this guy actually do for humanity? And why are we bothering to come together? You know, I'm a teacher. I'm here on a Saturday. And there's a NASA technician. He drove down because NASA considers this festival important. Why does NASA consider this man important? I'm going to talk about not just what he did, but how he changed the way people think. So I have to start a little bit earlier and I'm also going to talk about an argument that Sagan participated in, an argument that's still going on to this day, an argument that presidents engage in over whether we need to focus on sending out our robots or sending out our people. But our story of Sagan's intellectual birth really starts in a kind of a cabin in the woods in Russia in the 19th century that looks like people would go there to get murdered. So this cabin is where a math teacher worked at. Once again, if he's a public school teacher, he's probably unpaid, especially if we're talking Russia. Konstantin Cholovkovsky. And aside from being a math teacher, he was a scientist. Starting about the beginning of the 20th century, he started to publish books about ideas. He was really big on metal balloons. Nobody wanted to hear about metal balloons. The book that he thought that he was going to make the most impact with was a book that was titled, and to us, the title doesn't sound weird. To us, the title sounds like the use of an automobile to get to your workday. But it was science fiction back then. In 1903, he published The Use of Rocketry Devices for the Exploration of Space. And no one said anything about it. It would be one of those books that you see on Amazon and it doesn't even have like a star review. Its publishing rank is in the millions. But inside this book, he outlined the idea that maybe we could not only go to space in little containers that are pressurized, that shoot up, real Jules Verne-y stuff, but we could put buildings in orbit around the planet, maybe even have doors that can seal out so we can keep out any of the problems with space. We know that there's vacuum out there, but they didn't have an idea about that yet. And the crickets chirped around the world. But then Cholovkovsky publishes his second book. And his second book has a similar title. You know I don't like you. You can stand there. But this book says, here's the equation of how you can actually take a device and, balancing with the mass, shoot it up into the air. And at that point, people around the world start to take notice. Because now we have a practical application. Unfortunately, this practical application will probably not be what people would have wanted. But this is the story of space science in the 20th century. Not always used for what we want. So, he gets recognized, he gets put on a coin, and at least one person gets greatly inspired by this book. Just a few years later, talking about rocketry. Sagan isn't even born yet, but we can already see the people who he would consider his comrades are generally considered kooks, unless they give you something the military could use. We get to this man, Robert Goddard, who when he was a kid climbed a tree and looked up at Mars and thought, what would it be like to be going up on that rock, like to Mars, to be going up on something I could make and looking down. And this is the inventor of the liquid fuel rocket. And once again, except for his technical usage, people assume he's a loony. In his book on rocketry, he publishes 8 sentences saying, and you know, maybe we could land one of these things on the moon. And he gets laughed at around the world, like a presidential candidate who said something annoying. There is an editorial in the New York Times saying, I'm sorry that Mr. Goddard has failed high school science. And so Robert focuses solely on the rocketry, except for a little book that he puts away, that he gives to his friends in 1918. A book which he gives a false title to involving usage of gas, because he doesn't want anyone to see it, because he thinks he'll be embarrassed. A book which he writes on the title, Only to be Opened by Optimists. The time for that book will come later. The next person to carry on, the next dreamer, the military snaps up. But, unfortunately, it's not our military. While someone was going to join the military, this is Carl Sagan. You don't usually see him without his turtleneck. You don't usually see him without clothes. But this is the person we're here for. We're talking small, Reformed Jewish kid, born to very poor parents, Brooklyn, New York, and at this point, he's about 8. He's already starting to discover the universe. His parents don't know anything about science, but they try to teach him about what is true and what isn't. One day he makes up a story in a kitchen when he's reading about Europe, and he goes to the window and he tells his mom, I can hear Europe, and his mom says, no, you can't, that's impossible. And Carl just sits in a corner for 10 minutes and starts thinking, how do you know what's true and what's not? And this scientifically minded kid heads over at the age of 5 to the World's Fair, where the world is looking here at all of these inventions that are being displayed and new technologies. If anyone's seen Iron Man 2, they based the whole Stark Emporium on this. This was the world of the future, and in this world of the future, the little 5-year-old Carl is fascinated by one thing. One thing stands out for the rest of them, because they're burying a time capsule. So they're putting something away for future generations that they don't know whether it's ever going to be written. They are speaking to the future. They're speaking to people who they will have no idea if they ever reach. And this stays latent in Sagan's brain until the point that he makes 2 of the most impressive time capsules in human history. But I mentioned at the point that our story goes on to the military, so let's talk about the people who are, Sagan's spiritual ancestors. The person I'm going to show you next had a copy of The Exploration of Outer Space with Rocketry. And we know that his copy was filled with notes on every page in German. This is Werner von Braun, and you can see around him is the Nazi Party. Werner von Braun was the next most important rocket scientist of the 20th century. But, of course, there's a war going on, and he lives in Germany. So they put him to work building rockets. The problem for him is that they are building rockets, but the rockets that they use here, they are not made to go onto Mars. They are made onto London. So, if you want to do rocketry, you work for the military. And Werner von Braun has very distasteful moments where he doesn't really want to know where they're getting some of the labor that they're building his rockets with. The moment that the first V-2 rocket lands in London, someone asks him, how did the rocket flight go? And he said, the rocket flight was absolutely perfect except that it landed on the wrong planet. Of course, after the war, the United States is already looking forward. We should know we're going to be going toe-to-toe with Russia, ideologically at least, for the next 50 years. So we snap him up, and instead of rubbing shoulders with Hitler's elite, now he's rubbing shoulders with Walt Disney and JFK. He is one of ours. Project Paperclip brings over the Nazi scientists, and Werner von Braun continues the rocket program. Although, when he and people like Goddard mentioned the idea that perhaps these rockets could go out into space and we could compare planets, and maybe learn stuff about our own planet, they're kind of laughed at. Especially because von Braun is politically a little iffy. People don't like the fact that he worked for the Fourth Reich. It's a weird day for me. It's a weird day for me. I don't know if any of you have heard of Tom Lehrer, but I consider him one of the wittiest comedy writers of all time. Imagine Weird Al in the 60s and really darkly sarcastic. And Tom Lehrer summarized what many people thought about Werner von Braun, where he made a song about him, where one of the lyrics was, "When the rockets go up, who cares where they go down? That's not my department," says Werner von Braun. So right now, we're in the 50s. We don't have anyone who is a face to the common layperson who makes them want to care about science. At this moment, rocketry is for blowing other people up or impressing the people you want to help you blow up the other guy. This is where we need the Carl Sagan. So over here, in the 50s, here we have Sagan in a light you don't usually see him, getting ready to graduate from college. Sagan is successful in college. He's an incredible gifted student. His teachers say, this kid is going to be something, but he's too bored in our classes. We don't have enough stuff for this kid to do. And unfortunately, he's also not getting the respect he wants until space science suddenly becomes important again. Dr. Sagan, doctorate of physics, will soon be taken seriously, as all space things will be, because of a beeping thing that can fit in your car. This is Sputnik, which in Russian just means satellite. It is about the size of my head. It goes beep. It looks like something you would buy online for about 20 bucks to give to your friend if they're a tech geek. But this terrified the entire United States of America. The best writing I've ever read on Sputnik was by Stephen King. He wrote a nonfiction book called Dance Macabre, in which he talked about what scared people. And he said one of the scariest moments of his childhood was when he heard about Sputnik. King was about 8 or 9, was inside a movie theater, all the kids were waiting for the movie to begin, and then suddenly, the serial, Flash Gordon is punching someone, but as soon as Bing the Merciless steps on, the movie cuts out. And the projectionist walks to the front of the movie theater, and he says, "I've just heard on the radio that the Soviet Union has launched a radio satellite above our heads." And half of the kids start crying. While King remembers the kid next to him starts shouting, "You're lying!" Because they don't want to believe this. If you've gotten into space, space is above us. Now you can drop things on our heads. In the middle of the Cold War, space has just become important. And that's when people like Sagan start getting listened to. Right out of college, Sagan starts working as an advisor for NASA. This is the point where we have an idealist. Someone who has grown up on science fiction, to the point where he had a John Carter of Mars license plate. Yeah, no, you should read the books. The books are good. And Sagan has this need, this want to explore. Whatever Tsiolkovsky had, whatever Goddard had, Sagan's got it, but he has to figure out how to get people interested in this. At this moment, we're still doing military testing. The next thing that goes up, this is Laika. Laika is a dog that was the first Earthling in space. In Sputnik 2, inside that very small little silver ball up there. So Russia beat us to the first organism in space. And if I have time at the end, I will play for you. Jonathan Colton, geek musician, made an incredibly sad song channeling David Bowie's Space Oddity. It's called Space Doggity. And when I play it for my students each year, I apologize for them. Right now we are sending, at this point, chimps into space. This is Ham. We didn't name him until he came down, because the United States wasn't going to say that he went up until he came down successfully. If you think that that's weird, wait till I talk about the Russian space program. And Ham goes into space, comes down, and we know things like us, something with 98.5% of our DNA can survive in space. So, this has good and bad effects. On one hand, with Ham, he directly led to Alan Shepard's spaceflight. People kept joking to Alan Shepard that, hey, you got beaten by an alien. He was not happy with that. On the other hand, he directly leads to the creation of the movie Space Jam. So I suppose it's good and bad. I want to point out that when Ham was buried at the International Space Hall of Fame, Alan Shepard was asked to do a eulogy and declined, so perhaps he was still jealous after all those years. When Sagan just starts getting into the real programming that he wants to be able to do, what's going on is Russia is, still beating us, doing very well. They've put a man in space. They've taken pictures of the far side of the moon with Lunik 3. And at this point, Sagan is just starting to become famous. He's become an author. People think that he's crazy. He writes an incredibly popular book, Intelligent Life in Outer Space, working with a Russian, which, of course, also makes people a little uneasy. And this is the point where he starts to appear on television. Eventually, Sagan will be on the Johnny Carson show. If you've seen Neil deGrasse Tyson go on The Daily Show, this is the first time that you have a scientist coming onto television and entertaining people, which hurts his career incredibly. Because right now, all of you have probably grown up in the age of Mr. Wizard and Bill Nye and others, where you turn on a TV channel and there's someone talking and there's something cool in the background like an exploding star, and you know that you can get this. Sagan is the first. He doesn't even get those shows you. He doesn't get the talking head with the background where he can say, and there are billions of stars in the cosmos. Now, even just going on things like Johnny Carson, other scientists start to not like it. Because they wonder, why are you bothering to tell people about science? They're not scientists. Why do you care? You just want people to like it, aren't you? They assume that Sagan's a narcissist. So he actually gets screwed over. His dissertation is about the possibility of how life formed, with a guy named Harold Urey, who made a very famous experiment of, if we put together the conditions of the early Earth, we run lightning through it, are we going to get stuff forming that could build life? Spoiler alert, yes. But Harold Urey looks at Sagan, and when Sagan applies to become a tenured professor at Harvard, riding high, Urey sends a letter to Harvard and says, you shouldn't let this guy in. He's not fully focused on science. He keeps talking to people. What's up with him? But Sagan does what he can, trying to influence, to use a sense of wonder that only a science fiction addict with a genius level IQ can do. In '69, we go up to the moon, and everybody who goes up in those Apollo capsules was briefed personally by Carl Sagan on what kind of things they could expect. And just about every mission that sends something out of our atmosphere, Sagan has a hand into this. And there's an awesome German word called Schadenfreude, which means taking pleasure in someone else's misfortune. I'd love to put it that the day after Apollo 11, nearly 60 years later, the New York Times runs a correction saying, we ran an editorial saying that Robert Goddard was crazy. Further investigation and experimentation have confirmed that it's definitely possible a rocket could function in a vacuum. We are sorry. Yeah. So, you could apologize 40, 50 years later, maybe it counts. But now Sagan is firmly entrenched into the United States space program. And he's doing one of two things. He's saying, we need to get out there. And he's saying, how can we compare things? These planets don't exist in a vacuum. Well, they do. But they're related. So he's looking at places like Venus and saying, how does Venus relate to us? What's really out there? The Russians will get there first, but Sagan predicts what they'll find. At the moment, the Russians are still riding high. They managed to get a probe onto the moon to roll around. It's called the Lunokhod. But I actually love this name because what this means is that the first probe on the moon is called the Moonwalker. And sorry, I'm a child of the 80s, that makes me happy. Sagan helps working on the Mariner probe, which buzzes Mercury. And I'm going to show you pictures, but I want to give you the idea. This is not a guy who's just taking pictures of outer space. This is not just what probes do. It's also taking measurements of the atmosphere. It's taking measurements of the light. And from this, figuring out what are these places like. So when Sagan hears that the Russians are getting to Venus first, he says, well, here's what I expect them to find. First of all, you're not going to find what everyone else thinks is on Venus. He took a moment when he actually got a TV show to make fun of everybody because of this. Because I admit, I would have loved this to be true. But the way Sagan describes it is, what do people see initially when they see Venus and through the telescope? They see clouds. What causes clouds? Water. What do you get with water? Plants and jungles and big animals and maybe even dinosaurs, since it's probably younger than us. So, statement, we can't see anything. Conclusion, dinosaurs. You think the people on the History Channel who talk about the aliens get a little bit wide off. But Sagan starts to predict, there are so much CO2 in that atmosphere that most likely Venus is not a good place to be. And this is a thread that we're going to find throughout the entire history of Earth astronomy, that our names totally suck. We named Mars against the god of war, but Mars is a kind of quiet place. One of the best candidates for life in our solar system, the moon Enceladus, we named after a giant with snakes for legs. And Venus we named after the goddess of beauty, which probably we should not have done. Now, what Sagan is working on at the moment is the Pioneer program. And at this point, the child comes out. The things that you love as a child stay with you. They're hiding in the back of your head. They occasionally might scratch the brain, and you realize, or not, hey, I like that, or I remember that. As a parent, as someone who is just starting to raise a kid, I realized when I picked up a book, and I'm like, I bought this book because I loved it as a child, didn't I? And Sagan, with a probe that's going to be sent out throughout the solar system, suddenly, 5-year-old Sagan from the World's Fair steps in. Because what Sagan does is he makes humanity's time capsule. What he does is he makes a plaque, and on the bottom is the solar system. It shows where we are. In the middle is our galaxy. It shows how to find us. On the top is an atom, assuming that anyone who could read this would understand science. And then the part that he gets yelled at the most for, there's a naked man and a naked lady. Now, I understand why he did this. Because, you can see behind the man is an image of the Pioneer probe. So he's like, look, this is how big we are. One of the critiques was, you have the man going like this. If an alien race finds us, won't they think that we all walk around like this all the time? But, that's a small thing. However, this is being, sent out early 70s. So once again, people are like, why is this man sending pornography to the stars? The dreamers are not always appreciated in their own lifetime, unfortunately. But he's happy. He's really happy with what he's able to do. He says at this time, even today, there are moments when what I do seems to me like an improbable, if unusually pleasant dream. It's 73, he's sending time capsules to the stars, and he can't believe that he's doing this. I wonder if he thinks he'll wake up somewhere and someone will say, Carl, stop dreaming, go back to the office. Sagan is living his life. Russia at this point is doing funny things. Cracked, the humor website, once did a very good metaphor or description of the Soviet space program. They called the Soviet space program throwing men in murder machines in the sky. And that's not off base. There's a terrifying and humorous practice that the Soviet Union had, which was to delete any issues that they ever had. So, I'm sure that if you see pictures of astronauts, you'll see the classic picture of, there's 12 astronauts out on a field in front of NASA all hugging, being happy, being like the pictures you take in a yearbook. But whenever there was an issue in the Soviet Union, they would erase anything that wasn't a success. And they would even airbrush the images of the dead cosmonauts out of the pictures that would hang in the bar. So I want you to picture for just a second. Imagine you have a picture of a field, and there's one guy like this, and then no one else, and some dude like this over here. Imagine what it's like to be a cosmonaut and have that hanging in the bar where you relax at the end of the day. Sagan's hypothesis about Venus is about to get tested. Mars, why did I mix up Mars and Russia? They're both red. Russia gets to Venus first.
Both red?
A little, yeah.
This is what happens when you have a 10-month-old. Sleep is a luxury you cannot afford.
This was supposed to be Venera 1, was supposed to be Venus 1. But Russia never admitted to any space probes, to any launches, until they were successful. So, they set out the probe, it didn't get out of Earth's orbit, it just kind of kept orbiting us. And they called it Chalgitsy Sputnik.
We have successfully launched the heavy satellite.
Which is kind of the equivalent of crashing your car into a tree and telling your parents, I've successfully made a gigantic lawn ornament. And this will continue. Throughout the 20th century, Russia will talk about how successful it is with the Cosmos satellite series. Here's a spoiler. A Cosmos satellite is any satellite that is stuck on Earth after not being able to do what the Soviets wanted to do. But if you as a Soviet scientist ever say that,
you're going to get airbrushed out of the picture.
So, the entire Soviet space program's mission statement is basically, did I do that? This is Venus. This is Venus as of the Venera 9 and 10 probes. Sagan is chomping at the bit to see footage of other worlds at this point, and it confirms his hypothesis. Venus is the closest thing we have to hell in the solar system. Venus is 800 degrees and it rains sulfuric acid. If you look at these pictures, they are pitted and baked rock. This is the Venera 13 probe. This lasted the longest. Every probe that the Russians ever landed on Venus lasted between 33 to 127 minutes before melting. Meaning, the average lifespan for any given Venus probe is less than the average Avengers movie running time. Even if you don't stay for the credits. But at this point, this is where Sagan gets enough data to be able to talk to other people. He starts to invent an entirely new branch of astronomy. He begins to call himself and others planetary scientists. The idea is, so we know these worlds are similar. What can we learn from this? Venus is a hellish choked ball, and it got there because it's got a lot of carbon dioxide. I understand we're starting to pump carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, Sagan says. Perhaps if we start pumping carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, it will lead to rising temperatures on the planet. This is something we may want to pay attention to, he says in the 1970s. His next mission makes him incredibly happy. No, he does not fly to Mars, this is Arizona. But this is the Viking lander. Sagan gets to help design some of the mission to land a probe on Mars. And one of the things that he is very emphatically for is he wants to test for life. So there are 3 tests put on the Viking lander. When it lands, it does 3 different chemical tests for the possibility of Martian life. It scores at 33%. Out of 3 tests, 1 of them comes back positive, 2 come back negative. Sagan is really disappointed, especially because he wanted a 4th test. There was a 4th test that he thought would have been excellent, amazing to use. But in the year that this probe was going out, the man who had designed that test fell to his death in a crack in the Arctic doing work on hard-to-kill bacteria. And so we only got the 3 tests. And to this day, people still argue over whether there was some kind of chemical process or whether there is something in the Martian atmosphere, something crawling about, which is breathing out on Mars. There's nothing conclusive, but there's enough to wonder about. And we get pictures. And this delights Sagan. Every single time a picture is about to come in from the Viking program, you got to realize, you might think that your phone has a low rate of data transmission when you walk out to the edge of the parking lot, but it takes hours, pixel by pixel, for this to be drawn. We are literally getting messages from Pluto at the moment with our current models a little bit faster than we did on this ancient technology. I mean, if you've seen the movie The Martian, they're like, it takes 14 hours to talk to the person there. And that's, you know, using technology that they made up for a movie that's set in 2035. But Sagan waits like a kid watching a Christmas present slowly open every single time there's an exposed vista of somewhere else in our solar system. And once again, we get the answer, you know, there's an orange sky. But these are places like us. These are not abstract fantasy kingdoms. These are worlds. These are places we could go to. Who knows, these are places we could settle sometime. And this is where Sagan, at this point, in the NASA program, starts to use that imagination. Starts to say, you know, we're finally getting away from the military application as much as possible. We're doing pure science. We're working for knowledge. And he gets probably the biggest dream yet. This is the Voyager probe. It's still out there. It is the fastest thing our species has ever produced. The Voyager probe makes several stops along our solar system. They aim it outwards. But Sagan does two fascinating things with the Voyager probe. Two things which have this clear streak of humanist imagination in it, not just go out and get data, that show the imagination that he brought to the American space identity. First, there's a golden record on the Voyager. You know, you have the Pioneer flag idea, but this time capsule is not just something you look at. There are written instructions on the back of it how you can build a needle and slowly turn it and hear the sounds of Earth. Hear children in 150 languages saying hello. Hear the sound of rain in the Amazon rainforest. Hear Johnny Be Good, several galaxies away. And while this is cool going out, what Sagan does that still is one of the things that he's most remembered for today is something looking back. I want to quote him, but I'm going to have him use his own words. This is a picture of our planet. The picture was come to known as the pale blue dot. If you're wondering, right about there, that last little band of sunlight, that little dot, that's here. When the Voyager turns its camera back for the last time, just as it's passing Saturn, Sagan says, let's take a picture. And I think at this point, rather than, I'm not going to paraphrase Carl Sagan when I have his actual words, I would like to play two videos that show the speech that he later gave about this. This percolated in his mind for 20 years, and then a year before he died, at a speech in Cornell, he gave a lecture where part of it has become the pale blue dot speech. I have a poster of it hanging in the wall of my classroom. And the kids always ask me, sometimes when I play these videos, Mr. Leipzig, why are you sad? I'm like, no, I'm not sad. So I'm going to play this with my little speaker. The first one uses generally normal images, and the second one, someone has animated it. I can't imagine a better way to get you an idea of the effect that Carl Sagan had, bringing this kind of imagination, this kind of poetry, to not only the American space program, but to the imagination of Earth, than by having you listen to Dr. Carl Sagan. Powerful little speaker. Hold on a second. Why are you not going out? And you know, I thought that Dr. Sagan had issues when he was just out. No, that's my background. Why are you showing my background? I swear to God, why are you... I don't know what's going on here. Give me a minute. We are having technical difficulties. That's okay. Mariner had 27 technical difficulties and still got to murder. All right, I've hit the button. The button does something. The button does nothing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to listen to the words of Carl Sagan, okay? This is what he thought about pale blue dot.
The spacecraft was a long way from home. I thought it might be a good idea, just after Saturn, to have them take one last glance homeward. From Saturn, the Earth would appear too small for Voyager to make out any detail. Our planet would be just a point of light, a lonely pixel, hardly distinguishable from the many other points of light Voyager would see nearby planets, far-off suns. But precisely because of the obscurity of our world thus revealed, such a picture might be worth having. It had been well understood by the scientists and philosophers of classical antiquity that the Earth was a mere point in a vast, encompassing cosmos. But no one had ever seen it as such. Here was our first chance, and perhaps also our last, for decades to come. So, here they are. A mosaic of squares laid down on top of the planets, and a background smattering
I'm going to quit.
of more distant stars.
You saw it. You can picture it here.
Because in the reflection of sunlight off the spacecraft, the Earth seems to be sitting in a beam of light, as if there was some special significance to this small world. It's just an accident of geometry and optics. There is no sign of humans in this picture. Not our reworking of the Earth's surface, not our machines, not ourselves. From this vantage point, our obsession with nationalism is nowhere in evidence. We are too small. On the scale of worlds, humans are inconsequential. A thin film of life, an obscure and solitary lump of rock and metal. From this distant vantage point,
And this is the second part of the speech. Like I said, I'm sorry that we've suddenly had technical difficulty, but I could listen to this all day.
Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering. Thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization. Every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Even endless privileges visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel, on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturing, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lone speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
And that is one of the reasons, probably the main reason, why we have a day to celebrate this. He went on and did more science. He became the most famous science communicator of the 20th century. And that is where that road takes us. From science fiction, inspiring a kid, to a scientist who does not want to do technical work just to put machines out there, but to increase something of the human spirit. Sagan has a humanism in it, where he looks outside of the universe and tries to use it to teach us a lesson. Hey, you need to take care of this place. It's our only place. And we're all we've got. One of my favorite quotes from him is, if you disagree with a man, let him live. In all 10 billion galaxies in the universe, you will not find another his like. So using this poetical voice, Sagan creates Cosmos in 1980, a television program on PBS, which becomes one of the most watched programs in the history of television. I really kind of pity his son, because Nick Sagan was forced to watch Cosmos in every class that he went to, so he had to listen to his dad all day. The book Cosmos that he writes based on it is the first science book to ever become a bestseller in the United States of America. So no matter how many decades people spent saying, why are you bothering to try to package science to the masses where they're not the ones in the labs? Sagan gets it and gives us the message. He says in Cosmos, when they burnt the Library of Alexandria, not a single citizen stood in front of it, because the librarians had stayed with their books and their scrolls and had never ventured out of the gates to teach the people of Alexandria of the usefulness, of the necessity of knowledge. And so the books burned. Sagan dedicates his life not just to the abstract of finding data, but to the concept that this knowledge is useful, that this knowledge can be used to improve our lives, to give us even ethical teachings, and that it is worthwhile to keep learning. And that, to me, is the legacy of Carl Sagan. At the end of his life, he was disappointed with the space program. He was not happy with the space shuttle. The space shuttle, I've heard described, if you try to have a committee design a horse, you get a camel. The space shuttle originally was supposed to get stuff into orbit really cheap, like $20 a pound. If you can get stuff in orbit for $20 a pound, you have floating cities. Then the Air Force said, we want to change this to be more practical. Can we put a giant claw in it that can steal Soviet satellites? And to this day, there's still one classified space shuttle mission that none of us are allowed to know about, where I assume they did that. But because of that, the cost to put things in orbit became $125 a pound. And Sagan wanted to keep sending the robots out. He wanted to keep sending things out there, not only to bring information about other worlds, which he was of course fascinated by, but to compare them to ours, to learn how we can protect ours, and to put it in front of people and say, look, this is your universe. This is more fascinating than any of the lies they tell you in the newspaper about discovering Atlantis, or how because you were born when the House of Mercury was in the channel of the sun, you might have just a little bit interesting day. Sagan said that one time he talked to a taxi cab driver who was so interested in the universe. But he spoke about all the stuff that you hear on like the Animal Planet Mermaid documentary. And he's sad because he said, there's a wonderful universe out there, but these people don't know how to reach it because no one is teaching them the right science.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here because Carl Sagan taught me science when I was a kid. I was 8, my dad gave me a copy of Cosmos for an auction, and I sat, and there was this one page where he says, these are what aliens could look like on Jupiter. Floating gas bags, little hunters and sinkers, things that look like a cross between a frisbee and a blimp. And I stared at it over and over again. The first year that I started teaching, and you have to imagine, I really need a way to communicate with these kids because I'm teaching in an Orthodox religious school and I have to give the evolution lecture. And the first thing that comes to mind is I stand there shaking, hoping that I don't say anything that gets the rabbi to call me into his office, is I start quoting Sagan. And I start telling the same story about crabs that Sagan told in Cosmos. I am here in front of you today. I am a potential Broward County Teacher of the Year. I am who I am today because of Carl Sagan. I'm not the only one in this even room who can say that. I think the best memorial for him that I've seen was what his son did. Because, as I said, Carl was a dreamer. Carl loved science fiction. And his son, Nick Sagan, wrote a few episodes of Star Trek. And there's one episode of Star Trek where it begins about 200 or 300 years in the future. Because, you know, Star Trek, space, Enterprise, that kind of stuff. And what you see is, you see the Viking probe. And right next to it is a gigantic monolith that says, Carl Sagan Memorial Park. And there's people walking around it. And there's a little quote from Sagan on the park that says, hello, I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're on Mars, but I'm glad you're there. Ladies and gentlemen, that is why we love Carl Sagan. Thank you. Before I go on to the questions, I have certain announcements to make. First of all, obviously, just so you don't keep staring at Adventure Time characters, we only have to take 5 minutes to fix this laptop connection. Or maybe it's just my laptop. So, announcements. We have the food truck outside. I am going to need some pizza. There is a student group selling smoothies. They didn't even tell me that. I can't believe that. We're selling books and t-shirts outside. I have already snagged Sagan's copy of Pale Blue Dot, but I know that there are other Carl Sagan books out there, and many good ones. And we want to give thanks to Broward College for providing this venue, to the South Florida Amateur Astronomy Association, who, they're outside with solar telescopes. You know, we've been in this room. I don't know what the sky looks like, but if it's clear, you can look at the sun through that, and not only not go blind, but you can see sunspots. The Center for Inquiry, the organization that stands for Science and Skepticism, who puts this on every year. I'm very happy to thank Mr. James Randi, personal friend of Carl Sagan, and to NASA, who has also supported us every year. And now, with a few minutes in, are there any questions from the audience? Yes, Miss?
How do you think Carl Sagan would feel about how NASA got shut down by the government?
I think it's tragic.
Repeat the question.
She said, how do you feel Sagan would feel about the way NASA is being treated by the government? I think she would have been sad at, first of all, I wish Sagan would have just lived a little bit longer. Because he died in '96. He died just before we started discovering planets outside our solar system. The time Sagan died, there may have been a planet outside our solar system. Now we know of at least 1,000 with 5,000 possible candidates. So he would have been happy that we were finding that. He would have disagreed with the last 15 years of NASA politics. I'm not going to argue the partisan point of it, but at the beginning of his administration, George W. Bush took the funding away from robotics to be further towards manned missions. It would take an entire lecture to debate both sides of that point, and both sides have good arguments, but Sagan wanted more robotic missions. I think Carl Sagan would have been astounded to sit in his chair at home, or, you know, he'd probably be invited onto NASA and see the pictures from New Horizons. I think he would have been joyous at the knowledge we have and disappointed that we're not doing more. because NASA's budget is 1/10 of 1 penny of the United States budget, and it is the only government agency that turns a profit because it makes patents. There are people walking around with artificial hearts whose valves open and close because those valves were created for this International Space Station. Sagan would have been happy for what we've done, but I think he would have thought, why aren't we further? Did that answer your question? Do we have any other questions? Yes?
Which private companies are carrying on Sagan's legacy and which are doing well?
Okay, so the question is, who right now is carrying on Sagan's legacy? All right. Well, scientifically, Sagan founded the Planetary Society. And one of his old college students, a kid named Bill Nye, is currently running. So, yeah, I would love to see someone dramatize what it'd be like to be Bill Nye sitting in Carl Sagan's class. And I would say that NASA themselves are carrying on that legacy, because I doubt there's anyone who works for NASA, at least anyone except maybe a small minority, who's not in some way influenced. I mean, it's like going into horror and saying, no, I've never heard of this guy named Stephen King. So, Sagan's hand is in just about everything. Now, in terms of being a science promoter, I have to throw it over to Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was personally motivated by Carl Sagan as a young teenager, where Sagan had him stay with him at Cornell for a weekend. Neil deGrasse Tyson is doing what Sagan did. I mean, he hosted the New Cosmos. He cares, he does his own research, but he also cares about presenting science to people so they care about their universe, so they understand these things. And, even just this week, there were people who were throwing around bad ideas in the media, and at that point, Tyson goes on the talk shows, and people love him, and he's like, no, this is dumb. But he does this in this brilliant diplomatic way that only people like Tyson and Sagan can, where he doesn't sound snarky. He sounds friendly even to his opponents. So that's something that Sagan had that I think Tyson has. That was my personal desktop background. If you look at the desktop background of my school login, it is a picture of Carl Sagan, a plus sign, a picture of Lando Calrissian from Star Wars, an equal sign, and Neil deGrasse Tyson. So if you add Lando to Carl, you get Neil deGrasse Tyson. I definitely think that the next generation of Sagan is Neil deGrasse Tyson. Any other questions? Yes?
What would Carl Sagan's influence now to inspire us?
Ooh. Well, I'm not Carl Sagan, but I can take a guess at what he would probably talk about. As a planetary scientist, my opinion is, considering that he wrote about the greenhouse effect, that Sagan would say, something like, look at this pale blue dot. In the past 40 years, ocean acidification is up 40%. Your coral reefs can't form their shells anymore. They might go extinct by 2100. I think he would be, at one point, Bill Nye was on Fox News, and the newscaster looked at him and said, Mr. Nye, I dare you to look me in the eye and tell me climate change is the biggest issue that we face today. And Bill Nye said, climate change is the biggest issue we face today. I think Carl Sagan would have been right behind him. I think that's what he would have been focused on. And with that, we're probably going to have to take 5 or 10 minutes until the next meeting so that we can make sure that that is up and running, get the next speaker in. So next, we have Mr. Billy Stover from NASA. And I cordially invite you to stay. And I don't know why you're at Carl Sagan Day, but I'm glad that you're here. Thank you.